Director Boatright. Here. Mayor Brown. Here. Councilmember Cotton. Councilmember Harding.
Here.
Chair Mariano.
Here.
Mr. Glicksberg for Commissioner Miller.
Here.
Vice Chair Peters. Mr. Lehman for Commander Purify. Commissioner Sadiq.
Here, virtually.
Mr. Smith for Governing Board Member Watkins.
Here.
Councilmember Young. Here. Here we have a quorum.
Okay, thank you. And just to get everyone familiar with everybody, we've got a few new faces in the room. When we start, I'm just doing an introduction with everybody. I'm Jack Mariano, Pasco County Commission.
Ed Short, I'm the director of the Tampa Bay Estuary Program.
Dan McLean, Legal Counsel Program.
Smith, your chief. Morning, Dave Glicksberg. I'm the manager for sustainable water resources with the Woody Brown. I'm the mayor of the city of Largo.
I'm Maya Burke. I'm the Assistant Director of the Estuary Program. That's my title.
More on action, not titles, right?
Mark's vaccine scientist.
Hi. Harry Flaherty-Walia, I'm the restoration ecologist at the Estuary Program.
Blake Simmons, the environmental social scientist.
Michelle McEachern, Science Communication Coordinator at TBEP.
Jill Kunich, Accounting Specialist, TBEP.
Mike Artie, city council first, seats of Peterborough.
Kelly Boatright, Director of Southwest District.
Well, good morning, everybody.
Do you have a couple people online as well?
And if you, let's go with the online folks.
Commissioner Sadiq, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, good morning, everyone. Commissioner Sadiq, Manatee County, Chairman of the Board, and I represent the coastline of Manatee County.
Ms. Watkins?
Hi, good morning. Nancy Watkins. I'm a governing board member of the Southwest Florida Water Management District, and I hope everybody is well. And excuse my absence today. Thank you.
Mr. Lehman?
Good morning, everyone. Wade Lehman with EPA Region 4, the Southeast region. I am sitting in for Johnny Purify today. Thank you.
I just wanted to mention that Sheila Scalero, our community program scientist, is actually on maternity leave with her first child.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. All right. Are there any changes to the agenda?
No changes.
Okay. And minutes for the meeting from February 20th. Do we have any changes or discussion? If not, may I have a motion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right. And now we'll go to general public comments. You want to start with the Golden Mangrove Award presentation?
Yeah, let's start with that. As we typically do each year, we try to recognize an outstanding community Bay Mini Grant project. And this year, we're recognizing Damon Moore and his company, Oyster River Ecology, has done outstanding service in terms of trying to restore oyster habitat throughout our region. This project in 2025 was related to Oliver the oyster tray. Which is basically a tool they've been using to involve the community in oyster restoration by building oyster rag pots or ORPs throughout the region. And it was a great demonstration of how this project has leveraged a small amount of funds from the Bay Mini Grant Program, about $4,500 grant from us, with about 900 volunteers with over 2,500 hours of volunteered towards these oyster restoration activities. And actually matched it with $81,000 worth of in-kind services from those volunteers and other supplies. So again, just a great demonstration of how this project has leveraged a small amount of community-based grant funding from us with a lot of effort and sweat from our community members to get these habitats back in the Bay. So I'll invite Damon up if you wanted to say anything, and Megan from our Community Advisory Committee.
Recording. Hi, I'm Megan Blancher, co-chair for the Community Advisory Committee. We're the group that awards
the Bay Mini Grants and subsequently the Golden Mangrove Awards. Ed basically took all the words right out of my mouth. We're so proud of this project and how it embodies how this little amount of funding can go so far and improve the reach of your capacity to reach the whole Bay. And we're excited to continue to have you as a partner moving forward and celebrate all your great work that you've already accomplished and all you will accomplish in the future. And so thank you, Damon Moore with Oyster River Ecology. We're pleased to award you the 2025 Golden Mangrove Award for your project. Thank you for your work.
Goes for a photo.
Yeah, wait, let's step this
Here
way.
we go. Let's get out here.
Yeah.
Pins out. Look good here.
We will ask. We'll get the board up there too. I don't know if Damon wanted to say anything.
Oh, dangerous. No, I just I'll try and be brief. I'm not good at it, but I'm just really impressed that I got an award for a utility trailer. That's awesome. But like Ed said, like it's always been really important to me to like get people involved with this because that's how you make like lifelong stakeholders in the quality of our bay and the quality of our region. And yes, there's been a lot of them, and I don't think I mentioned that trailer hauled out 30,000 plants to the north end of Anna Maria to do a dune planting after the hurricanes and everything else. But the part of it is, yes, I needed a lot of community. Part of it was I was at that point really starting a nonprofit to really put some proof of concept into play. That has been absolutely instrumental to me to be able to get this out to the community, and I get the actual outside of the involvement of people, but work in the water done. This tool has gotten us to where like we have over 35,000 square feet of oyster reef done, most of it using this trailer to haul stuff back and forth from volunteers and everything else. So that's been huge for us to try and kind of redefine what actual cost efficient oyster restoration is, because quite honestly, like we're hundreds of acres deficit. Like we see it like in the habitat management plan update, where you're like 300 acres you guys are calling for there. We're not going to get there unless we find a cost-effective way to do that. So we've been kind of laser focused on doing that, and this has been a huge tool to help us go from concept into implementation to where at this point we're getting this done at like $6 to $8 per square foot, which is literally like cheaper than putting rocks out there. So one other quick little note I just have to bring up: this is not the first time I've won this award. About 20 years ago, when I was the first grant I ever wrote, literally, was restoration at Mariposa Key at the mouth of Bishop Harbor. No clue what I was doing, but I was like, just let's get this done and get a bunch of people out there. So we it snowballed. We ended up clearing like 7 acres of pepper trees off of this really beautiful natural space out there. And it was, we got an award for that too. So it's really awesome. Like this is like a whole different phase of career I'm in now, but like, it just goes to say that like, that gave me a boost of confidence in that point. In between that point and now, I've written and received probably over $20 million in grants with stuff that I did when I was with Manatee County. So it's just really a great program. I'm glad you guys do this. Keep it up. And I'm going to shut up now. So thank you.
All right, Damon, we're going to go up and take a picture with you.
Yeah,
And I
and
just
if we
want to
could-
say, what you've done for between getting grants, between getting the volunteer involvement is just amazing. So thank you for the great work you've done. And we're going to be looking for you in Pasco County coming up.
Yeah, if you don't mind, we'll get all the board members to take a picture as well. Let's do with the orb too.
You see the ones that we put out on the
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Tell me where to stand. This is all. Everything on my gut.
Okay. Perfect. And then Brendan's back. Randy can't see you. Ready? Say cheese. Say orb. Orb. Golden Mangrove. Oh, for social. It is going on the Insta.
We should hold up a picture of Tal.
Okay. Beautiful. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Good work.
So the stage room. So David's just going to explain sort of the techniques he's using. What is
I tend to forget that part. So this is an oyster rag pot. It is made out of a 12-inch by 14-inch cotton rag, a little wood spacer inside, and a landscaping pin, and about 47 cents worth of cement. Total material cost for this is just under $1, which is what the concept being is like oysters in this area are limited by that hard material that we call culch to be able to grow on, mostly because really between like 1920 and 1960, there was like large scale mining of shell for road projects across the state. So what this does is provide that hard material for them to grow on, but instead of like covering the entire bottom with that culch material, we put these in a foot apart and allow those oysters to grow into each other because they're called ecosystem engineers. We're letting them use that title correctly and growing in like that. We have 10 acres permitted in the Manatee River where we're working. By July, we should have 7 acres or 5 acres in Safety Harbor, another acre down in Sarasota County. And we're getting like apparently Pasco County. We're heading up there soon from what I hear. But it is working really well. And it's working like at that price point where we can start to actually make meaningful gains on this and try to get back to some of our historical norms. And the awesome thing about that is it's one of those shifting baseline things where nobody alive understands what that bay would look like with that level of filtration. So I'm the guy over there saying, we're going to do 100 acres in the Manatee River, but I think this is going to end up being a part of it. So, but we'll do it wherever you want. So that is that. It's dangerous to get me going.
All right. Well, congratulations again. All right, now we're going to move to our action items. Quarterly financial report, Mr. Sherwood.
Yeah, on page 8 of the agenda packet is our activity for the first half of fiscal year 2026, activity through March 31st. So as I briefed you all, we're about halfway through the fiscal year. So if you look at that last column, we want to see sort of those percentage of the budget around 50%. In total, through this first half of the year, we're about 1.38 million in terms of total revenues, which is about 40%. That's a little bit behind in terms of our federal grants, and I have a footnote there. We've actually made a drawdown after this quarterly report was published, and that's mainly from the pace of projects being completed and us receiving bills to seek those reimbursements from some of those federal grants. And then on the expense side, there's a couple of footnotes I've mentioned on prior board meetings. We're about 96% on our capital outlays and small equipment. And this was going into our budget planning last year. We did not anticipate some software purchase that was encompassed in that line item. And I'll actually be making a request for a mid-year budget amendment for that line item, as well as our communication services for some additional expenses that to replace laptops, as well as purchase some new software that wasn't anticipated when we developed the budget back in August. And in total, we're about 1.34 million in terms of total expenditures, which is about 32% of what we anticipated last August. So in total, like I said, nothing out of the ordinary, a little bit behind in terms of what we anticipated going in terms of the initial budget, but that will hopefully pick up the pace as we move towards the tail end of this fiscal year and receive more bills for projects that we're have with partners. So I'd be happy to answer any other questions that you might have on the quarterly financials for the first half of fiscal year 2026.
Questions? Have a motion to approve. Go to second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, the motion passes. And now we go to the 2026 mid-year budget amendment.
Yeah, so on page 10, this is basically optional for the boards to consider, but we do like to do a mid-year budget amendment, which brings us a little bit closer to what we would have to adopt as a final budget when we meet again in November. This again is taking a look at the pace of our revenue and expenses through the first half of the year of the quarterly report I just reported to y'all, and then making some minor adjustments. As I mentioned, under the expenditure side, we're bumping up the capital outlays and small equipment, and that's accommodate some additional laptop replacements for some staff who have some damaged laptops that we need to replace. And then also some additional website software that we need to take over from our website contractor. So we need to incur some of those expenses this year. Some other minor adjustments on that page relate to our technical and communications contract and consultants. We bumped that down slightly just based on our project managers look at what expenses they're anticipating through the course of the rest of this fiscal year. And that affects basically on our revenue side, some slight reductions, both in our federal grants, but a little bit of bump up in terms of our fees and contracts that we acquire through additional grants that come into the program. So we just basically moved around where those funding and project costs would be reimbursed from based on our project managers' outlooks for the rest of this year. On the positive side, we've received a lot more contributions and donations this year than what we anticipated. So there's a slight adjustment there. And we're also receiving a lot more interest revenue from our banking accounts than what we anticipated going into this fiscal year. So all that's on the positive side in terms of additional revenues coming into the program that we could use towards projects and programs. So that in total is what we're proposing as the amendment, the mid-year budget amendment under agenda item 5. Be happy to answer any questions you have on that item.
Any question about the mid-year budget amendment? A motion to approve. Do I have a second? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay. Now we go to the third amended and restated interlocal agreement.
Yeah, so I'll introduce this item, and then if Jan McLean, our legal counsel, has any other additional comments, I'll turn it over to her. This is related to the interlocal agreement that you actually just adopted at the February board meeting. Since that time, we actually had a request from one of our partners, Tampa Bay Water, for 2 modifications to that adopted interlocal agreement that has been going to some of your boards for final approval and full adoption with signature pages back to us. The 2 updates that were requested relate to the definition of the entity within the body of the interlocal agreement, and the second relates to a requested change on their signature page. Both fairly non-substantive changes, but because one of those changes occurred within the body, our legal counsel recommended us bring it back to the board for adoption and ratification. We have informed several of our partners that have already provided signature pages and already sought approval of that interlocal agreement to give them that update to their legal counsel, and we actually have received one updated signature page from one of those entities. And we also know that the Water Management District, as well as Hillsborough County, were made aware of that basically these past couple of weeks when they brought it to their boards. So again, more of a formality to get this adopted and ratified, but because it's a change within the body, it's probably appropriate for you guys to consider it. I don't know, Jan, if you wanted to say anything else.
Exactly. It's more procedural. It's just the first request for the definition of the entity Tampa Bay Water is, since it's within the body of the interlocal, my recommendation was to bring this back to the board so that the board could take final action. This will be our final revision to the interlocal until the next time that it's up for update. So it's been working really hard to communicate with all of the members to make sure that they have the correct version. I've talked to a couple of the legal representatives, so it looks insubstantive, but it's still within the body of the interlocal. So that's for your approval of the change.
One, 2 small changes. Great job on it. Any questions? We have a motion. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay. Now for the 2027 US EPA work plan.
Yeah, so this item actually relates to final adoption of our fiscal year 2027 work plan, which basically becomes our grant application to EPA for funds we receive and are congressionally appropriated to each of the NEPs. We've been level funded for the past several years So we would be receiving about $850,000 through those federal appropriations that we match with the interlocal agreement funds that we're moving through and getting adopted this year for that update. In total, the local funds that are used to match the interlocal agreement equate to about $679,000 from all the local partners sitting around this room. Because of the difference between the total appropriation we receive from Congress and that local funding source, we actually have to make it up to make a 50-50 total match to those federal dollars. And we usually do that through an in-kind project request from our partners. This year, our new interlocal agreement partner, City of Largo, is committed to projects for some of the rehabilitation they're doing on some private or some lift stations within their watershed that help address one of our CCMP activities. And that fully makes sort of that federal contribution to our program whole with that additional project. As I mentioned, this is an agenda item we actually reviewed at the February board meeting. So the projects that we've identified to fund through this fiscal year 2027 work plan have not changed. There's a variety of existing as well as new monitoring programs that we're looking to support, as well as a habitat master plan implementation project that encompasses fully permitting and coming up with conceptual designs for an artificial tire reef that's off of Pinellas Point. We've been working with the contractor, and we're going to be adding on funds to fully support the conceptual design and permitting for that project. And there's basically three options being investigated there. Basically, partial removal of some of the artificial tires, a full removal, or to kind of monitor things in place to see how those tires might shift through time. So we'll be fully developing those designs and permits as part of that project. And we only have earmarked about $25,000 in this work plan. So our idea was to also add on about $35,000 in specialty license plates funds to fully support the design and permitting for that project. So I just wanted to mention that because it's mentioned in the body of the work plan and just explicitly state we're leveraging those additional funds to fully support that project. On the community and outreach and education project side, our normal give-a-day events as well as community engagement events are funded through some of those projects there, as well as enhancing our program branding and marketing. We'll be working to update our behavior change campaign centered around the Scoop the Poop campaign, which is a pet owner to pick up after your pet sort of behavior change campaign that we've pursued in the past. We're going to be updating that with some new materials and outreach activities to involve pet owners in responsible picking up after their pets. So it's reducing nutrients that might be coming from those pet waste. And then last but not least, we'll be funding support for our 8th Bay Area Scientific Information Symposium, which is a regional science symposium that we've held going back to the early 1980s, about every 5 to 6 years, although it's been longer during certain time periods. But we've been holding that just to bring sort of the state of the science and bay restoration activities to the forefront and highlight really all the work that's being done within the region as part of that scientific information symposium. We're planning on that event to be next fall, tail end of 2027. So be inviting a lot of your staff and scientists and partners to participate in that meeting. So that basically is the first two agenda items, 7A and B, basically asking your final approval of that work plan, which basically funds about 90% of our operations, as well as these additional projects I just highlighted. And that will, again, turn into a grant application that will submit to the EPA and receive sort of that approval through EPA over the summer, which will start the work plan on October 1 of our new fiscal year. Agenda item 7C relates to an existing agreement that we have with EPA for additional funds that have come into the program through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. We've received about $4.5 million from Congress over the 2022 to 2026 period, and we identified 12 projects that through this board that were previously approved, and we have existing EPA agreements. We actually had a request from one of our partners, Hillsborough County, who's asking us to reassign the funds for one of their projects related to Archie Creek Stormwater Restoration Project, move the funds from that project to a septic to sewer conversion project that they've identified through those IIJA funds. And we were just asking for your approval for me to submit a formal amendment requesting that change to EPA, since we already have an existing agreement for those funds and the projects identified. So in total, there's 3 actions. 7A is to approve the final fiscal year 2027 US EPA annual work plan and budget. 7B is to authorize me as the director to submit that work plan to EPA Region 4 as our cooperative agreement for fiscal year 2027 funds. And then also authorize me to submit a separate infrastructure investment and job act amendment, work plan amendment for those funds specifically related to the Hillsborough County projects I just specified. Be happy to answer any other questions you might have on any of those items or dig in a little bit further on the full work plan or anything else.
Before we get to the questions, should we do these individually, A, B, and C, or all in one shot?
So to the pleasure of the board.
We'll do them individually, but any questions for A, B, or C? All right, let's start one by one. Give a motion for option 7A. All in favor, say aye. Aye. 7B. Second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. And 7C. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Okay. Well, I'll pass unanimously. And now we go to number 8. Environmental restoration. Jessica.
The Tampa Bay Environmental Restoration Fund. It's one of the 2 competitive grant programs that we manage at the Estuary program. I have the pleasure of managing both of them, so I get the pleasure of giving out money to people, which I really like, for great work that they do in the watershed. So Tampa Bay Environmental Restoration Fund, or TBERF for short, is what I'll call it, so I don't have to say that 1,000 times. We fund water quality improvement projects, habitat restoration projects, applied research projects, social science-backed behavior change campaigns, and community-based communications or education campaigns as well. So a wide array of things that support our comprehensive conservation and management plan for Tampa Bay. This is a competitive process. The RFP goes out every year. We've had some really great support this year from Hillsborough County, Manatee County, and Pinellas County, Mosaic Company, Community Foundation for Tampa Bay, Crossway Memorial Fishing Tournament, a cooperative funding initiative from the Southwest Florida Water Management District, and several other smaller contributors as well. That all comes out to about $800,000 plus available for projects this year. And it was a competitive year. We received 21 applications while the RFP was open between January and March, totaling a funding request of over $3.2 million. So we had to whittle that down quite a bit for funding this year. Representatives from many of those contributors that I just mentioned sit on our review team. That's a team of practitioners and people who work for those entities that have a wide array of expertise that comes together to review these proposals, score them, provide feedback to Ed as he makes the funding recommendations that are before you today. So this has gone through a process of vetting from entities across the watershed. So in front of you today are the funding recommendations. There are 6 projects totaling $810,346. That includes restoration implementation projects, social marketing campaign, and an applied research project. That's all I have before you today. If you have any questions, either about the process, about the program, anything like that about the projects in front of you, I'd be happy to answer them.
Any questions for Jessica? Okay. So with A, B, and C again, do you want to do these here seem a little bit easier to do one shot?
Yeah, Commissioner Sadiq might want to recuse themselves because they're one of the recipients.
Okay.
Do you need anything formal from me? I'm just not going to vote on it, I guess.
You only have to recuse yourself from item 8B3.
Okay, I'm fine with that. Should I leave the meeting or?
No, you're just abstaining from that section and I have it noted.
Copy.
All right, so a motion for approval for number 8, A, B, and C. Note the abstention for B3. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. Number 9, Executive Director Staff Reports.
Yeah, just wanted to bring it to your attention. I know I mentioned it during your briefings, but this is also related to the Tampa Bay Environmental Restoration Fund. We were actually planning a celebration on June 4th at the Tampa Garden Club, and hopefully you received the save the date and invitation for that event. We're celebrating over 100 projects funded at greater than $10 million as part of that Tampa Bay Environmental Restoration Fund going all the way back to the early 2010s. So please come help celebrate and, RSVP so we get a good head count of how many people might be attending and planning the hors d'oeuvres and other accoutrements accordingly. And then, Jessica, you want to mention our other grant program that's coming up?
Sure. So the other grant making program that we have are the Bay Mini grants. In case you aren't aware, the Bay Mini grants are also competitive awards that support any action in our comprehensive conservation management plan, but it has a strong focus on increasing community stewardship throughout the watershed. So really getting people involved. Damon's project that he mentioned earlier with Oliver the Oyster Trailer was one of these Bay Mini grants. The program is funded through sales of the Tampa Bay Estuary Specialty License Plate, which I hope everyone has. And we just opened that on Wednesday, the RFP, it'll close in September. And we're going to have a couple of webinars in between that interested applicants can come to attend. If you're able to share that on your social media or with your neighborhood groups, your small businesses, neighborhood associations, nonprofits, anyone with an actual entity is apply. So it's pretty broad in order to get a lot of people involved. One of my favorite parts of my job is getting to brainstorm on project ideas with people. So if someone has a really vague idea, you're welcome to tell them to reach out to me. And I'm happy to sort of help them craft their application.
This year, we're accepting proposals up to $10,000. So we're bumping it up this year as well.
It was $5,000 for the last several years. Now it's $10,000. We'll see what kind of new, different, bigger, even better projects that we might get.
And last but not least, we wanted to just communicate from Michelle some communication performance metrics that we're contemplating some changes for.
Thanks, Ed. So yes, we have been reporting to you reach index metrics, and it's scrolling to it now. These are like snapshots in time and just give you a really static look at how mostly our social media, but some of our other like website statistics, I guess, are performing for like the 3 months, the last 3 months. I am proposing to change this slightly and report on trends. Something that I've been trying to work on is increasing our reach, like getting to more people in the watershed and getting a lot more engagement. So while these are informative, they don't really track the progress of that. So I'm proposing doing that, but we wanted to bring this before you before we do make any changes to what we're reporting on performance metrics and ask if there's anything that that you want us to preserve specifically, especially if there's anything that you're using in your own entities.
We did actually hear from the management board members that certain partners use this information for their MS4, municipal separate stormwater system reporting. So if there are specific metric used in that reporting, we'll want to maintain those as much as possible if used by partners as well. So just communicating with your staff that if there's any of those things, just get with us. And we noted them from our management board sort of interactions yesterday.
And these won't go away. There's still things that we can capture easily, as well as Marcus mentioned yesterday that our website does track the trends over a longer term. So that's also already available.
Yep, that was it for that.
Now we go to project highlights, driver of bloom variability.
Yeah, this is actually a request from the last policy board meeting for a little bit of update on a harmful algal bloom species that has been observed in Old Tampa Bay quite consistently going back to early 2010s, if not earlier. And Carrie Lopez from Fish and Wildlife Research Institute is going to give a little bit of update, not only within this area, but other areas throughout the state where there was interest of these blooms occurring. So turn it over to Carrie. Thank you again for joining today.
Yes,
Appreciate
thank you for having me. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about factors influencing short-term and interannual variability of Pyridinium bahaments blooms in Tampa Bay. And when I talk about short-term, I'm really talking about within bloom variability. And so I'm going to address three primary questions today. First, what are the factors that drive Pyridinium bahaments bloom phenology? And I'll explain what I mean by that in a minute. What are the factors that influence short-term and interannual variability, like I said? And then the last point I'm going to address is some hypotheses on why we think we have not seen Pyridinium blooms the past 2 years in Tampa Bay. And so this slide is just for a quick review of some of the characteristics of Pyridinium that are important to understand. So it's a single-celled algae. It's an armored dinoflagellate. That top photo shows 2 of the cells. It has flagella that it uses for motility, so it can vertically migrate in the water column to, come to the surface for more light and to the bottom for more nutrients. It produces saxitoxins, so it poses a health threat to humans and wildlife. It can close shellfish harvesting areas. And then lastly, it has a resting stage, which is what this bottom photo shows. And that resting stage, you can compare it in some ways to plant seeds. And so this will come up in the presentation, but the seasonal diagram on the right is just kind of showing the cyst in the sediment. So we have the bloom in the summer up in the upper left quadrant. And then at the end of the bloom, the cysts are formed and they settle to the sediment where they overwinter and then they germinate the next spring. And so just really quickly, Pyridinium has a global distribution and it's subtropical to tropical, so it likes warm weather. In Florida, we do observe Pyridinium cells. This is like a 10-year period that I'm showing here, but all of the dots on the map are observances of cells. And so we have, it is common along our coast, but there are a couple areas that are hot spots where we see the higher biomass, which are the red and orange circles here. So Indian River Lagoon, Tampa Bay, and Pine Island Sound tend to be the locations where we have the higher biomass, the higher abundances. And so I mentioned the bloom phenology, and that's what this figure here is to show the periodicity in the blooms. So I have 4 regions in Florida where we observe Pyridinium blooms, and then on the y-axis is showing Pyridinium abundance on a logarithmic scale. That red dashed line is what we consider like the high biomass threshold, and this is from 2015 to 2024. And the point of this is just to really show you in all of the regions in Florida, we have the same periodicity. So we see the peak abundances in the summertime, even if, like in the Pasco scalloping zone, if we're seeing lower abundances, those peaks are still happening at the same time in different regions of Florida. And this periodicity is really driven by the annual cycle of temperature, which influences the life cycle, as I mentioned, because as we know, we see the blooms in the summer and then the cysts are formed. After they're formed, they can't germinate. So cells can't emerge from those cysts until they break their dormancy, much like plant seeds. So they require the cool winter temperatures to break dormancy. So then in late winter and early spring, that's when we start to see the cells come out of the sediment and start to divide. As the water column warms, the germination speeds up, the cells divide more quickly, and then so that springtime is the pre-bloom time when the bloom is developing, and then we see the manifestation of the bloom in the summer. So the seasonal timing is pretty predictable for Pyridinium in Florida, but the severity of blooms and the variability we see from year to year is not predictable. And we really need to understand that better so that we can manage blooms and prepare for them better. And so today I'm just going to talk about some modeling we did with some of the FWC's routine. We have a routine monitoring program where we sampled the 9 stations shown in this, so the blue and the red circles. The red circles are our hotspot bloom stations. So we did some modeling with this 13 years of routine data, and we were essentially modeling bloom probability. So the probability of a bloom based on temperature, salinity, prior 14-day rainfall, so the cumulative rainfall over a 14-day period. And then we also were looking at the abundance of cyst in the sediments, as well as the existence of a prior bloom. And so this is showing scenarios with that model. The model that performed, we fit several models, and this one performed the best. And you can see the, so we have temperature and salinity on the X and Y, and then I have scenarios with low rainfall and high rainfall, left and right, and then low cyst at the top and high cyst at the bottom. And you can see the difference that high cyst stations have, you know, like twice, they're twice as likely to have a bloom. And then you can see that periods of high rainfall also increase the probabilities significantly. And one thing I will say about temperature is that those 95% of our summer temperatures occur in that peak probability window, which just, you know, reiterates the point that temperature is important for the timing of blooms, but it doesn't really influence the variability we see from year to year. And so this is an example of the output of that model for one of our most severe bloom years, 2021, at our hotspot stations. So we see 4 stations here, and the probability is on the y-axis. And I just wanted to show this because we can compare what our predictions look like compared to observations, which are the circles at the top. And you can see that it matched really well for this year. And then you can also see the difference in the first panel, which is station 1, our northernmost station. You can see the probability response difference in after Hurricane Elsa. We had a lot of rainfall, and the salinity declined at that station more than the others. And so the probability of the bloom dropped, whereas at the other stations, probability remained high, and we continued to see bloom abundances at those stations. But at station 1, where the salinity dropped, we were bloom observations were absent for several sampling periods in a row. And then we can contrast that to 2024, which was the first year we did not see a bloom since 2007. And we can look at the predictive probability of that year, and you can see for all the stations for most of the year, the probability of a bloom was really low because it was dry conditions and the environmental conditions just were not optimal. And then following Hurricane Debbie in August, we did see a peak in probability, but that did not match observations because we did not see a bloom. And so that just highlights the importance of timing for the environmental conditions with Pyridinium, as I mentioned. So if there's not a pre-existing bloom, or if it's too late to support those cysts that are germinating, then we're not going to see a late manifestation of a bloom. That's not to say that other phytoplankton can't take advantage of that flux, but for Pyridinium specifically, that's an important thing to consider when we're looking at some of the patterns we observe. And so we wanted to look into that a little bit more, the influence of the seasonal context of environmental conditions. And so we calculated annual severity indices for Pyridinium and for chlorophyll with the FWC routine monitoring data. And so the top panel is showing the Pyridinium severity. And so just for a severity of 1 would be average. So we had above average severity for 5 years in a row for Pyridinium between 2018 and 2022. And then we had our most severe years, 2018, 2019, and 2021. And then looking at chlorophyll, we see less variability around the average, but the most severe chlorophyll years were also the most severe Pyridinium years. And when we looked at different environmental conditions, in relation to what we know about the bloom stages. So again, spring is the pre-bloom when sister germinating cells are starting to divide more rapidly. And then summer is the bloom manifestation. We found with summer, there was no significant relationship between the variability of rainfall or summer nitrogen loading and the severity indices for Pyridinium. And so that's not to say, summertime is not only the time that blooms manifest, but it's also the time period of highest rainfall and highest nutrient loading. And these results are not to say that the phytoplankton community is not using those nutrients, but by the time the bloom is established, there's probably reliance on internal nutrient cycling. And so we're not seeing the direct linear relationship with the summer nitrogen loading or the rainfall. But when we look at spring, this top panel shows the relationship between Baywide nutrient loading and annual severity, the annual severity index. And we saw that springtime rainfall and nutrient loading explained a good percentage of the variability in annual severity. I will point out that 2021 was an outlier with rainfall because that was actually a dry spring, but that was also the year that we had the Piney Point release in the early spring. So that top point in the top panel is nitrogen loading from 2021. And so just to point out that the rainfall for that year was an outlier. And when we looked at OTB specific nitrogen loading, which is the bottom panel, we did not see a significant relationship with bloom severity, even when we removed the 2021 outlier, which is the top point. And so this just highlights the connectivity. I mean, you can see a trend there, but the relationship was not significant. And this just highlights that the base segments are connected. And so it's important to consider. And so we wanted to look, another factor that was contributing to annual variability was the abundance of cyst in the sediments. So this bottom panel shows cyst abundance in the sediments within 2 kilometers of the hotspot stations that I mentioned before. And you can see that in 2024, which was the first year without a bloom, we had a significant, and that's also on a log scale. I'll just point that out. So in 2024, we had, order of magnitude lower cyst abundance in the sediment, and that was a significant difference. And when we look at the model output from our probability predictions, we can see the difference that having a low cyst source makes in the predicted probability. And so this top panel is showing the plot that I showed earlier for 2024 with the predicted probability. And when we reclassify those hotspot stations as low cyst abundance based on that 2024 survey, the probability of a bloom is reduced by half. And so the take home from these different approaches is that a cyst abundance decline resulted in a reduced inoculum. So we have a reduced cell source to support the bloom. And also that environmental conditions in the spring are important for the pre-bloom development stage. And without those two things, Pyridinium has a decreased competitive advantage to other algae. And so just to summarize, we know that the annual cycle of temperature controls the patterns we see with Pyridinium blooms. But this work using 13 years of data also shows that salinity, temperature, rainfall, nutrient loading, and a significant source of cells are important for interannual variability that we're seeing in blooms. So the conditions in the spring set the stage for the bloom, and then the conditions in the summer are important to maintain the bloom. And so going forward, I just wanted to point out that while we saw an order of magnitude decline in the cyst abundance in the sediments, there's still cysts in the sediments, and they're still higher in, some other locations in Florida. So the cysts are there, the potential exists for a bloom, and we can compare what we're seeing in Tampa Bay to other regions of the world that have pyridinium blooms that have disappeared for a few years and then returned. So just because we haven't seen it for a couple of years, we know the cysts are there. There's still potential for bloom. What we're finding is that within the bloom, rainfall is supporting, continuation of a bloom, and then the springtime conditions are important. So efforts to control nutrient loading are still important for controlling pyridinium blooms. And we need a better understanding of the complexity of the relationship and underlying some of these patterns we're seeing. And then lastly, even when pyridinium blooms don't occur, we have other phytoplankton that can take advantage of those nutrients. As we saw in 2024, pyridinium wasn't present to take advantage of that flux of nutrients following Hurricane Debby, but we did see other dinoflagellates take advantage of that. And so if you look at the bottom panel, you can see that even though we had no pyridinium bloom, the chlorophyll index was still around average. It wasn't a low year for chlorophyll, and that was in part due to this bloom of this other dinoflagellate. So that's all, and I'll take any questions. Thank you.
Any questions? I've got a couple. Oh, we've got, sorry.
Go ahead.
Brandon?
Phytoplankton species and creates that lifestyle.
There are other dinoflagellates that form cysts that are in the sediments, and we're actually seeing now that the pyridinium has always, since I've been looking at sediments in Tampa Bay, been the most abundant cyst. But there are now kind of in equal proportions with other dinoflagellate cysts. We don't know as much about the life cycle of some of those dinoflagellates. This actually, what we do know about pyridinium and the dormancy cycle that I mentioned was supported by TBERF. That was one of the first projects that we had supported by them, or that I had. So we learned that the winter temperatures are important for breaking the dormancy, and that is in part driving the pattern that we see in blooms. But we don't know about the other dinoflagellates. It seems that, they may have a different niche.
Got a question for you. So as far as the sediments go, it seems to be if the sediments have the cysts and the conditions right between rainfall and temperature, the chances are it's going to much higher to go. In Pasco, we have the scallop season later in the year, get the rainfall, and then all of a sudden, like 2 years in a row, we've never heard of it before, becomes a problem. I know there was some dredging down at the Anclote River, but it was a ways down. Do you think that might have anything to do with stirring up the sediments there that might have floated downstream to get to that area?
I'm not sure. I mean, I think that sediment transport and dredging activities like that can definitely transport. I mean, there's work that shows that even, in ballast water, dinoflagellate cysts can be transported and introduced to new areas. So, but I'm not sure. I mean, I don't know, but it is definitely in the, it's possible. I will say that, so this is Pasco zone on the bottom panel, just to show you, we do see like lower abundances there. And this is over a 10-year period. One thing to consider when we look at this, it looks like we're seeing an increasing trend every year. And that may be the case, but what's not shown here is our sampling effort. And so our sampling effort has really picked up. And so I think we need to look at that more to see if we are really seeing an increase, or if we're, it's been there and we're looking more now. But it does, at least the past few years, it does seem like we're starting to see higher cell abundances. We did a sediment sampling last year in the Pasco zone, and cysts were very low compared to Tampa Bay. Even now, Tampa Bay, like they were but they were there, but very, very low. But
I appreciate you could take a look at that correlation. When I look at the old Tampa Bay slide, it's pretty steady high all the way through, and then 2024 it drops down a lot. So if this sampling changes, maybe something happened, but that shows a pretty good improvement. When I look at the next one, Pine Island down, kind of fluctuates a bit. Any reasons why you think those are different, or this, and why it's steady in like Indian River Lagoon?
yeah, so Tampa Bay and Indian River Lagoon have been, up until 2024, when we did not have a bloom, blooms there have been really predictable. That, you know, we would see high biomass blooms in those locations every year. There were cyst beds that were in both locations. They're both areas with long residence times, and so just the areas themselves contribute to sort of that recurrence. Pine Island Sound is a little bit different. There are cysts there. The locations we've looked at, they are also lower in abundance, higher than Pasco Zone, lower than Tampa Bay. But that area is also, it's different hydrodynamically. So I think that could be part of the reason we we don't exactly understand the drivers. We don't have as much data in the Pine Island Sound region, but that is sort of the next step, is to take what we've learned in these areas where we have many years of data and start to apply them to other regions to see how the patterns are similar or how they differ, and understand those differences if there are some.
So when I look at Indian River, and Indian River years ago, they've had a big push on putting baffle boxes up and down, major investment, but it doesn't seem to have an effect much, except a little bit in 2024. Do you think if sediments are in the ground, even if you're improving water quality, et cetera, these cysts that are in the ground are going to keep on coming unless you get rid of the sediments?
Well, I think what we're seeing in Tampa Bay is that the cysts are still there. Although we did see an order of magnitude decrease, we're still seeing, you know, in the hundreds of cysts per gram of sediment. So if you imagine just like a little bit of sediment, there's still a lot of cysts there. It's a lot less than there were. But I think one thing about Pyridinium is it's a slower grower. I mean, that's why we see it take so long to build up. And so by having a lot of cysts in the sediment, and then having those conditions right when they germinate, that's how they get their competitive advantage. And so I think having lower cyst numbers helps, because they have a reduced, it's like they're trying to get a head start, but if they have lower cyst numbers, they're going to have less of an advantage. If the environmental conditions aren't right, I think that is going to be critical, because if there are less nutrients in that time to support their growth, then that will depress the cell division. So I think one of the concerns with removing sediment is that other phytoplankton, all other conditions the same, the other phytoplankton will fill that niche. We talked about this a little bit yesterday. So I think, more holistic strategies are better, because Pyridinium's not the only, bad one out there. So
A little bit about this yesterday at the management board meeting, and framed it a lot around what we call like no regret solutions. Continue to control the food source. Nutrients is always a good idea, because like Carrie mentioned, that even if we don't see a Pyridinium bloom, if there's nutrients present, other species can capitalize on it. And the whole reason why we're interested in controlling algal blooms is to improve light condition for seagrasses to grow throughout these areas. So that's sort of a no regret solution that has been the bread and butter of the program. But beyond that, sort of controlling that cellular loss and actions that will improve the cellular loss so that those cyst beds don't build up. So that's things like improving the circulation through causeway alterations, as well as oyster restoration within Old Tampa Bay, so that those cells are being fed on and they don't have a chance to become cyst and ingrain in the sediments. So those are sort of like the no regret solutions that we've been advocating for as a program and trying to build momentum around. We think if we follow those, over time, pyridinium potentially has less of a chance to be a problem in those areas if we sort of follow those recipes in the future.
And just to follow up to what Ed said when he's talking about cellular loss, really a bloom is the imbalance between growth and loss. And so pyridinium, it has a lot of defenses and advantages. And so it can, even though it's a slow grower, like the growth exceeds the loss. And so that's why if we can do things to increase the loss, we can sort of offset that and prevent the biomass accumulation. I'm sorry, what were you about to ask?
I was gonna say, would you go back to the slide that showed Tampa Bay and the dots in there where the counts were high?
This one?
No.
Oh, the cyst map.
Yeah, that one there. So you get the 2 red dots. Anything leading to what may be causing those 2 red dots? Because in between them, you get some orange ones. Anything in that stretch that may be attributing to why those cysts are more prevalent there?
That's probably a hydrodynamic question, but I would say that while this is not showing raw numbers, we're kind of categorizing 1,000 to 5,000, then greater than 5,000. I'm not sure how different those orange and red dots are. But I will say the dot to the left of Bayside Bridge, that red dot, I do know that is that's been traditionally a really high abundant spot. But then you can see we have a green one next to it. So I guess the point is it's really patchy. And so if we did even, more resolved sampling, we would probably have a better idea of the patchiness. But I think the main take home from the surveys we've done is that the area kind of in between, so you'll also see there's a red one underneath, like in Safety Harbor, underneath the yellow, that whole zone is just an area where we see high cysts, and anything really above 500 is what we call high abundance. So, yeah.
So from that, let's say that further left dot, so if there's runoff, it could be runoff that's causing.
I think it's a hydrodynamic, the settling. So it's a function of both, because these cysts are immobile. And so it's a function of where the blooms occur, number one, and that is our area where we see like the highest, it's like a positive feedback. We see the highest abundance in that zone of the yellow and orange dots. That's also the area of there's longer residence time. So we have retention. So the bloom occurs, the cysts settle in fine sediments. So hydrodynamically, they're settling like with clay particles. So where we find those finer sediments is where we find the cysts. And then, they are redistributed a bit, but for the most part, they act like fine sediments when they're in cyst form.
Maya, do you want to say something?
I think she covered it. It's just, it's not just nutrient loading that's occurring right there behind the Bayside Bridge, but that area is basically the oldest water in all of Tampa Bay. There's sort of a gyre that forms between those 2 bridges on that side of the bay. So any nutrient load that is coming from the watershed, and even what Carrie was saying earlier in her presentation is that nitrogen load from other parts of the bay even come transport in and make their way around, but they can kind of get stuck in that loop, right, in that area. So it's not just that it's collecting nutrient pollution, it's also collecting living things like cells from pyridinium. It's also collecting these really fine sediments, and all of these factors sort of conspire together to make that the hot spot.
Cindy?
Is there any research in blocking the life cycle?
No, not that I know of. That's an interesting question. I think one question I'm interested in is how the populations adapt, because what we've observed, because as you saw, we see subtropical distributions to tropical. And in areas where there's less seasonality, the life cycle triggers, the transitions can be different for other dinoflagellates. So there's work in the Northeast with Alexandrium where they look at deep water populations where there's less seasonality and shallow water populations, and they see different triggers. And we see different patterns in the water column in tropical versus subtropical populations. So I've wanted to see how sort of like the mother population, the population that creates the cysts, if with climate change, if the seasonality changes and becomes less, like the amplitude of the seasonality comes less, like will the life cycle triggers change too? That's an open question that we're not sure of.
Yeah, just to add to that, Kate Hubbard at FWC actually made us aware that Moat Marine is actually experimenting with some algicides actually in Tampa Bay this month, primarily centered around Korean red tide blooms, species blooms, but they're going to be doing some dosing experiments off the Little Manatee River, Wolf Branch area this coming May. And that kind of gets at your question, trying to short circuit the life cycle through algicides, but it's still fairly experimental, I think, at the state level that they're experimenting with it.
Any other questions? All right, Carrie, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Gary.
All right, now we'll project highlight Baywide satisfaction survey results.
Up next is Dr. Blake Simmons. He's going to go over some of the results from our surveys that will inform our next major update to the comprehensive management plan for Tampa Bay. Blake's been doing yeoman's work in terms of involving some more social research science in our programming and as well as our decision making. So he'll give some initial results from the satisfaction survey we held over this early part of this year.
Yeah. So we had talked about this at the last policy board meeting. We were in the midst of collecting data for the satisfaction survey. So today I'm just going to give you a really high level overview of the results, some of the key takeaways, especially for revising our comprehensive conservation and management plan. For reference, whenever I gave this presentation internally to our staff about all the results, it took about an hour and 45 minutes. So today you are getting very high level summaries. In the future, we'll have a long report that comes out that details everything. We're also going to have a bunch of different meetings with all of our subcommittees over the next year where we're going to dive deeper into more of the results. So if you ever want to know more or investigate all of the things that are going on, feel free to engage in those other platforms. So why did we do this? As most of you know, our Comprehensive Conservation Management Plan, our CCMP, is up for revision by the end of 2027. So this next year, we're going to be jam-packed with activities to figure out what the next 10 years of conservation and management in Tampa Bay is going to be. So to start us off, we wanted to get an early temperature check of what the public views as important priorities for the next 10 years, but also how they think we've done in the past to get feedback from the public, but also from the people that we engage with all the time. So we collected this data between February and March, and so we've just had about a month to go over these early results, so there will be more coming down the pike. Basically, we had two key audiences that we were looking at because we don't want just the people that are always in the room to tell us what they want and where we want to go. We did distribute this to the general public that may not be familiar with us, don't know who we are, don't know what the CCMP is. And so we had about almost 900 folks from throughout the watershed that participated either online or through mail surveys. And then we also have what we call an in-network audience. So these are people that are directly engaged with us, either through our meetings or through our emails, but also the folks that are indirectly connected to us somehow. So if any of you took our survey links and shared them, and then somebody took it through that's what we call an in-network person. So they may be more environmentally friendly, and so we don't want to just lump them in with the general public. We also included within that a set of experts in water quality and habitat restoration, specifically in Tampa Bay, not just because we value their opinion, but also there are some questions where we wanted to see how expert opinion differs from the public opinion, and how that might help us going forward thinking about strategies. In terms of the representation that we got, so kind of contextualizing the results that we're going to talk about today, this is the breakdown of the participants throughout our counties, the majority of them coming from either Hillsborough or Pinellas counties. The in-network sample has a few Manatee County residents and just a few Polk County residents, but we do see in the public sample a little bit more representation across the board for Pasco, Manatee, and Polk counties. So what was in this survey? The crux of the survey was all about the CCMP. And so our CCMP includes over 30 different conservation and management actions. And as much as we'd love to throw that at everybody to get their feedback on, we knew people wouldn't be interested in answering questions about more than 30 different types of actions. So internally, we prioritized 10 that we would really like feedback on. And for each of those 10 actions, we asked participants about the relevance of that action for either their local community or for the region as a whole. We asked about their perceptions of the level of progress that we've made for each of those actions, the feasibility of accomplishing it over the next 10 years, and finally, the overall importance that they placed on it for the next 10 years. But we also included a bunch of other things that can help us out. So one of them is we wanted to get, after this last 10 years, a temperature check of people's perceptions of us as an estuary program. So their image of us, their view of us, our level of reliability, credibility, perceptions of bias that people think we might have, their experience with our different activities, their satisfaction with them, if they haven't participated in any of them before, what activities they're most interested in that we provide, the perceptions of our different resources and how useful they are to folks, and overall our performance as a distributor of information, a synthesizer, and a place of bringing partners together. We also asked them some questions to help gauge their perceptions of different types of habitats across Tampa Bay. These included different types of shoreline designs as well as native habitats. And we wanted to get an idea of what the public thinks is the most desirable types of shorelines or habitats and some of the characteristics that they associate with those habitats. Similarly, thinking about the perceptions of water quality across the bay, we showed folks underwater and surface water images of Tampa Bay and asked them to visually guess what they thought the level of water quality was for that and assign different characteristics to it to help us understand how the public is going to be interpreting conditions of Tampa Bay and how that may or align or misalign with expert opinions. And the last thing that we asked them was about their overall experiences with nature and how these have changed over time. So I'll talk about, we have some different types of nature experiences that we asked them about, but we really wanted to gauge the longer resident folks, how are their experiences with nature changing over time, and how might we be able to address that as an estuary program in the future. So I'm just going to focus the majority of this presentation on those CCMP questions, but I'll highlight some other ones along the way as well. Now, those 10 actions that I talked about, I'm just going to briefly summarize them so you have an idea of when you see the results, what type of actions we're talking about. We've got this one. This is focused on fertilizer ordinances. So this action was to reduce nitrogen runoff from urban landscapes, primarily via our local fertilizer ordinances. We had our reclaimed water action, so expanding the beneficial use of reclaimed water. Identifying and understanding emerging contaminants of concern in Tampa Bay, our continued assessments of human and environmental health indicators suitable for our recreational waters, encouraging habitat enhancement along altered waterfront properties, so this living shorelines action, enhancing the ecosystem values of tidal tributaries throughout the bay, minimizing impacts to wildlife and habitats from dredging activities, promoting public involvement in restoration and protection, providing for and managing recreational uses of the bay, so that recreational access component. And then the last action we put in front of them was about climate adaptation for our bay habitats. And the way this worked is we first presented them with a short description of what that past action is in our CCMP. We did have, for the folks that took the survey that are one of our partner organizations that our CCMP outlines as being a responsible party for implementing this action, we first asked them, has your organization over the last 10 years made significant progress to this? And this was us to get a better temperature check of what do our partners think we're achieving? Where are the areas that you think that they think we're not making substantial achievements? And then for everybody else, we asked them a bunch of different opinions. So for each of the actions, we asked folks how relevant they thought the action was to the city that they lived in. So there's this local relevance, but also the relevance to the Tampa region as a whole. We asked about the relevance to the groups that they belong to or the people that they identify with. So this is a measure of social relevance, the things that are important to them and the people that they care about. We asked everybody about their perceived level of progress over the last 10 years. So both experts and non-experts. We want to know what everyone thinks, how well people think our areas are doing across these projects. If they were a partner organization, we asked them about the perceived feasibility of continuing this action over the next 10 years. And finally, everyone was asked about the level of importance for that action over the next 10 years. So in thinking about what's important to folks, here's some of the key results.
Can I ask
overall. Oh, yeah.
If I could, Dr. Blake. What were the results of that set of questions right there?
The results, I'm going to talk about them right now. Yes, perfect. So we found that across those, we found that overall, all of the actions were considered important for the next CCMP. There wasn't any particular standout action where folks said, I don't think this is important. So that's quite good in the sense that we don't have a lot of challenges that we're up against in emphasizing the importance of these. We did find that the emerging contaminants and the health indicators were the top priority. They were considered the most important across our public audience. We found that of those characteristics that we included, the regional relevance was the most influential factor for predicting how important someone thought an action would be. But we did also see some regional variation in terms of the people that thought some actions might be more relevant to their specific community. And in terms of progress, how we've done over time and how people are using the CCMP, we saw that our partners thought we'd had the greatest achievements across the recreational access, public involvement in restoration, our living shoreline adoptions, and our fertilizer ordinances. But where they said that we had the lowest achievements was in our emerging contaminants, those dredging impacts, health indicators, and our tidal tributaries. And we also wanted to see how people are using this CCMP. What are they going to it for? What are they doing with it? And we found that the majority of people are primarily using it to learn more about the issues or what they can do personally to have an impact on the bay. So I'm just going to dive a bit deeper into each of these so you can kind of see how it all falls out. Here in this graph here, we've got for every single of those 10 actions that we have, the percent of the public respondents that indicated how important it was over the next 10 years. And so the darker the color is, the more importance that it was given. And so you can see kind of, as I was saying, overall, the majority of people think that all of these actions are very high or high in importance over the next 10 years. And so that's great. That makes it a little trickier in terms of us trying to prioritize things. It's like if everything looks great to folks, then how do we know exactly to go forward? But we do see inching out just a little bit ahead of the other ones are those concerns about emerging contaminants as well as the health indicators for our recreational waterways. So those are really sort of the two things that the public thinks is most important in a sea of things that are generally important. But if we contrast this with what our in-network folks thought, we actually see more variety in what the people who are usually engaged with us seem to think are the top priorities. And so I'm just going to highlight the main ones from our in-network respondents. Their top priorities here are the fertilizer ordinances and the adoption of living shorelines. And it's worth noting that there is a bit of a misalignment between what our in-network audience thinks are the most important issues and what the public thinks are the most important issues. So these emerging contaminants and the health indicators, which are the top priorities for the public, are some of the lowest priorities for our in-network audience. And so as we go through our CCMP revision, we're going to have some conversations to say, hey, the public is really concerned about these two issues. How do we incorporate that into the next CCMP, given that it's maybe not our top priority for all of our partners? Does that mean we place more emphasis on those actions, or maybe we embed these issues throughout all of the actions so that no matter what action we're taking, the public's preferences or priorities for these two issues are embedded throughout, so we can hopefully make most folks happy and they can see the relevance throughout there. We wanted to see of those different characteristics, given how prevalent importance is across all the actions, what is most important for predicting that level of importance? And so we chucked them all into a model, and basically what this is showing you is that all of these things are important predictors of someone's level of importance. The local relevance is important. If people think it's more relevant to their city, they're going to think it's more important. If they think it's more relevant to their social groups, they're going to think it's more important. If they think more progress has been made, they're going to think it's been more important. But really the key thing here, as I was saying, is that regional relevance. It is the strongest predictor of whether someone is going to consider an action important or not important. And that's a really good sign, because at first, when we were crafting these questions, we were worried that people would only think something is important if it was important to their city. So it had this local relevance. And that would present a real challenge in us sort of having to make every issue about a local situation. But what we're seeing is that public recognizes just because it may not be an issue for my town doesn't mean it's not important for the rest of Tampa Bay. So that's great for us thinking about messaging and writing our future CCMP. In terms of that local relevance, though, we can do some deeper dives. We did ask folks what their zip code was, so we can create these maps to map out how different communities are answering these questions. And there's a lot of stuff that you can go through here, but the one thing that I just wanted to highlight here are 4 actions that had the greatest variability across the area in terms of the perceived local relevance. So the more red the region is, the higher level of perceived local importance this was to them. And there's a lot of zip codes here. You can always do deep dives to look at your specific area. I just want to highlight these 3 where there is especially high levels of variation in perceived local relevance. Those mostly being in Pasco County, in northern Polk County, as well as northern Manatee County, across fertilizer ordinances, living shorelines, tidal tributaries, and climate adaptation. So as we go into our CCMP, we can use these very spatial, localized results to say, okay, which areas think that something is more important or less important? And do we agree with that? Do we think that perception is accurate? If it is, then that's great. But if it's not, how do we think about reframing these issues to help emphasize the local importance for these areas where people don't think it's very important? And in terms of achievements, so here you can see for all of our partners that responded for each of these actions, the percent of them that feel we made significant progress or not over the last 10 years. And so just to highlight the areas where folks think we've made the most progress, again, it's in our fertilizer ordinances, our adoption of living shorelines, as well as getting the public more involved in restoration and increasing recreational access to our community members. Where they think there are the lowest achievements, though, are the emerging contaminants, the health indicators, the tidal tributaries, and the dredging impacts. And so this is another one where, again, as we're going into the CCMP revision, getting folks together, especially our partners, and saying, okay, where have we made the most progress? Does that mean that we still keep it as an important action, or can we kind of check it off of a list? Do we reprioritize these areas that have not made significant progress? If they haven't made significant progress, is it simply because it's just not feasible? Can we even do it? Should it even still be a priority, though we haven't made much progress on it? So these are all things that we're going to have to be thinking about over the next year. And then finally, we wanted to know what people were using our CCMP for over the last 10 years. So we gave them a list of a variety of different potential reasons that they may have used the CCMP over time. They go from very general, just interested in information, to very specific things, like I'm using it for a specific restoration project, I'm using it for a grant, things like that. And across the board for both the public as well as our in-network audience, the number one reasons were to just learn about the issues that were affecting Tampa Bay, to learn about the actions that our partners are taking, and to find ways that they could personally help, so how they could contribute to a healthy and resilient Tampa Bay. And that's quite nice, but what it tells us is that the CCMP is primarily being used as just like a reference source. So it's just a source of knowledge, information, but not necessarily being used to actually implement change. And so that's going to be something that we also want to think about as we revise our CCMP. Are we happy with having the CCMP just be a reference source, a place for people to learn more and to become more engaged with the issues at hand? Or do we want to kind of re-envision the purpose of the CCMP and make it more of a tool? We want people to come here primarily to actually solve a problem, or to find answers that they're specifically going to use in their work to help create a healthy and resilient Tampa Bay. All things that we're going to have to consider over the next year. So that's a summary of the key CCMP feedback sections that we have, but I'm just briefly going to highlight some of the other ramifications that our other topics have for moving forward over this next year. Starting with those perceptions of us as an estuary program. Some good results. We found that about 75% of the public say that they believe we are a credible and unbiased source of information about the state of the Bay. And this is specifically coming from people that have never heard about us before they took this survey. So this is really just a gauge of initial impressions, which is really important when we think about TBEP being in the news, or people seeing an ad or a Bay Mini grant sign or something like that, helping us understand, okay, how do people initially think about us? Do we run into any sort of problems? And so far, it looks quite good on that end. A little bit on the downside, 66% of people said that they trust the Tampa Bay Estuary Program to be able to make decisions in their best interest. Now, I caveat that with saying 66% is 2/3 of people, so that is quite good. But compared to the other ones, it is the lowest percentage that we have. So thinking about how do we help instill more trust in folks that we are looking out for them, and that we have their best interests in mind. In terms of thinking about our resources that we provide to folks, we saw that the product that we have that was considered generally the most useful by folks was our open science products. So about 83% of people saying that they found those very useful. A bit more on the negative side, again, caveated by saying 60% is still quite a good number here. But generally, we saw a lower percentage of people that believe that we as an organization are doing a great job at synthesizing and distributing information about the state of the Bay. So that's another thing that we can think about as we design our CCMP. How do we improve this? How do we do a better job of synthesizing all of the actions that are out there, all the things that are, issues for the Bay, and how do we distill that for people in a way that's engaging and understandable, and how do we get it out there to not just our partners, but also the public. That section on habitat evaluations, basically what we did is we present, yep.
Okay, let's go back to that slide again.
Yes.
And it's just like, I look at 75 and 83% as great numbers, but that's 66% trust. What does everyone feel about that?
Yeah. So, in terms of from the survey takers, we had a range of responses. And so it can be that it's basically an agreement scale with this, from strongly disagree to strongly agree with these statements about trust. And so this 66% represents anyone that said they somewhat agree, or strongly agree with their level of trust in us. But it does also consider a response that says, I don't know, or I have no opinion. So it's also it's to say that, the remaining 44% doesn't necessarily mean that they disagreed. Some people just wouldn't have an opinion.
Wait, can you clarify the trust question? Is that also for people who this is their first engagement with the estuary program, or is that a broader audience?
Yes, so this is for everybody. So this is for people that are engaged with us already, but also the people it's their first time hearing about us. So just at face value, how much trust would they have in just hearing a representative of Tampa Bay Estuary Program is going to be making decisions? Do you think that they'll make them on in your best interest?
So when I think your question is, what do you make of that? And what I make of it is trust is built over time. And so it'd be interesting to take a deeper dive into some of those responses and see if there's a difference between those who have engaged with us for a certain number of years versus those responses for those that are just, this is their first engagement or interaction with us. Because I wouldn't expect someone to trust me just from a survey interaction. That's my personal expectation. I think it's, multiple touches and things over time. The other thing that I think is important, just in how you think about this question, is whether or not something is in their best interest, and how people perceive their own interest is, I think, always a question. Whether or not they trust us to do something in the best interest of the Bay, and then whether or not that is aligned with how they perceive their own self-interest is another question. So I think this is like really complex.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I think of when I look at that.
So maybe we should maybe look at modifying that question, just be more general to say, how do you think we're going to make decisions? As opposed to in their best interest, because that could give you a different twist.
Well, I think what you're kind of starting to tease out is some of the deeper dive analysis that Blake can perform. This is just, again, we got these results less than a month ago. And so he's been taking, the first stab at it. And I think there are some interesting questions we could ask to get a better assessment of what that means.
Yep.
In-network, that would be an important question for the in-network. Because if the in-network was only 66%, that would be a red flag for me.
And it is interesting too. So the in-network audience has mostly across the board has much higher percentages than these. So the 75, the 66, the 60, the 83, the 83 is only for the people that have worked with us. But in general, the in-network audience, the people that are familiar with us, have higher scores on all of these, with the exception of one, which is interesting in that we had a question about the level of bias that they have. And so again, it's another one where the percentage is still quite high and favorable, but for their perceptions of us being an unbiased source of information, our in-network audience had a larger share of people who disagreed with that than the general public that was familiar with us. So, yeah.
A lot of dynamics to statistics. Thank you.
Yeah, great questions. So onto our habitat evaluations. Basically, what we did was we showed folks one of these images from these different shoreline designs and different native habitats. So we tried to capture a variety of options here. The shoreline designs everything from a seawall down to a more natural oyster habitat. And then our native habitats, they range from very terrestrial upland habitats to more aquatic habitats like oyster bars. And what we did was we presented one of these images to folks, and then we said, on a scale that we have here, how much would you like to have a place like this closer to your home? So it's this level of desirability of having access to that particular habitat. And then after they answered that, we asked them some questions about different characteristics of it, like the perceived beauty of that habitat, the perceived safety of that for habitat for visitors, the perceived social and economic value of it, and things like that, where we really wanted to gauge what is it that is most desirable to folks and why is it more desirable. To save us time, I'm just going to focus on the shoreline designs for this. So if you want to learn more about the native habitat results, we can always talk about it later or look at the other reports in the future. But basically, the high-level results that we saw here, the seawalls and riprap shorelines were considered the most desirable to the public. Here's a breakdown of that. So for each of these bars, we have our seawall, our riprap, our reef ball, and our oyster shorelines, and the desirability score overall for all of our public respondents, with 10 being the highest desirability. And so we can see clearly that the seawall and riprap have a higher level of desirability than especially the reef balls, but also the oyster shoreline. And this is an example where when we put this in front of our habitat restoration experts, we wanted to see how different the restoration practitioner opinion was from the public. And we see an exact opposite trend. So our restoration practitioners, of course, think it's more desirable to have an oyster shoreline than a seawall closer to them. And so this is another example where, our restoration practitioners, they're the ones creating these shorelines, they're the ones advocating for them, they're the ones designing them. And if there is a big mismatch in what they want versus what the public actually wants, we might run into some deeper trouble. Yeah. Did you have
a question about the soil and the seawalls? General question. And a lot of families, you got boat traffic, et cetera, you got your house, that's what you want to see because it's a lot easier to use your property. But did you put any questions in there as far as like comparing to regular seawalls and like a living seawall?
No. So that's the other thing, is that we only showed these 4 different images. We tried to get ones that were as similar as possible to one another. So a similar amount of natural space to them, similar water conditions, ambient conditions, and things like that. But yeah, and one of the things that is also important to recognize is that I intentionally, to try to make them all as similar as possible, intentionally pulled a seawall image in a very attractive and aesthetically pleasing area. So this is Philippi Park that in Pinellas County here, but the results could very well change if they saw a different image of a different seawall that is maybe just very gray, there's just parking all around it, or, it's less natural. So yeah, that's a caveat with all of these, is that it's just one image.
I don't think the regular public is familiar enough with living seawalls to know what it means and what it would be. But I think maybe it might be a good question for the experts. How do they feel about the living seawall compared to the regular seawall?
Yeah. And so that's a great example of how we can use these to then, in our habitat restoration consortium meetings, our technical advisory committee, how we can take this information and say, okay, what can we kind of work with here? If we're seeing that seawalls are generally preferred, how can we maybe think about these living seawalls or these sort of hybrid shorelines where we can give the public what they want, but also still get environmental benefits from it? Or is it a matter of thinking about, we need to completely change public perception? And so we need to create this whole campaign that says, hey, stop preferring seawalls and instead go straight for the 100% natural living shorelines. Those are all kind of conversations that we'll be able to have in thinking through these as we move forward. But so basically, we also looked at those characteristics to see what it is that is most important for driving that desirability. And what we found was that perceptions of the aesthetic beauty, the economic value, and the safety of that shoreline for visitors were the most important things. And kind of once again, we can see opposing beliefs between the public and the experts in terms of which areas are more beautiful to them, the perceived economic value. So our experts are, sort of saying these reef balls, these oysters provide greater economic value, whereas the public sees greater economic value in the seawall and the riprap. Safety for visitors is pretty much consistent across the board for our experts, but not to the public. The public views the seawall and the riprap as much safer types of designs. And so all of this is again to say, we need to use this to think about when we are creating living shorelines, hybrid shorelines, we need to think about what the public wants and how they're going to perceive these different types of shorelines, because the people in the room making those design decisions may have a very different view of what the economic value, et cetera, is than the public is actually going to believe them. In a similar vein, we did a water quality image evaluation from them. This stemmed from us sort of seeing, within the news, within the media, social media stuff, people are seeing different images of the water in Tampa Bay, and we're wondering how that sort of interpretation might influence their perceptions of the level of water quality. So we once again presented them with one of the underwater images and one of the surface water images and asked them, based off of just this image alone, how would you rate the overall quality of the water in this photo? And then again, ask them about different characteristics, the perceived sense of smell of the water, the perceived amount of sewage or contaminants in it, sort of things like that. And I'm just going to focus on the underwater images for here. But basically what we saw is slightly different from the habitat evaluations in that there was greater alignment between the public and expert opinions here. And so here you can see for each of the underwater images that we have here, the water quality score, the perceived water quality scores from both our experts and the public. And so while there may be some, big differences between the experts and publics, relatively speaking, they're showing kind of the similar perceptions where both the public and our experts see this image here, as well as this third image here as representing better water quality, and this one, the second one here as having generally the lowest perceived water quality. We did throw this into a big fancy model, and we found that even more so than just the color of the water, the clarity of the water was primarily and most consistently driving people's perceptions of water quality. And so this is really important for us to think about when the media is looking for photos to include in stories about good water quality or bad water quality. How do we make sure the image that is being used aligns with that story? If you're going to use an image of the bay where it's very cloudy or very murky, even though it may be a good representative image of a relatively healthy bay, the public is going to see that and say, oh no, that's gross water. That can't be good. And yet you're telling me that the water is perfectly fine. So this is an example of how we can apply this to our messaging, to our communications, to make sure that the public's perception aligns with the messages that are being told. Importantly, a big takeaway from this is also this image here that was rated by our staff as generally the most representative of the average conditions of Tampa Bay at any point in the given year is considered by the public as well as our experts to be of the lowest quality. So that's another issue, particularly of concern where we're like, hey, this is, kind of what it looks like most days, but we don't want people to think, oh my gosh, there's some, we need to freak out about this. It's quite a normal condition. And then the last item that I'm going to talk about are those experiences with nature. And so basically what we did was we asked people a series of questions to gauge how much time they typically spend engaging with different types of nature. And so we have what we call indirect experiences with nature. So this is stuff where you're not actually in nature, but nature is still nearby or it's still in your mind. And so this can be sitting in a room with a view of nature, like a park or a green or a waterway outside of your window, or listening to recordings, watching documentaries, or things like that about nature. And we asked them how much in an average day, how much time they generally spend doing those activities. But we also have direct experiences with nature. So where they are out in nature itself. And we asked in an average week, how much time do they currently spend in different types of these areas. So an outdoor sporting area, not the most natural type of nature, but still nature. Urban nature areas. So again, a little bit more natural to it, but very manicured, very curated. Cultivated natural areas, so farms, pastures, those types of things. Again, getting a little bit more nature heavy. And then ultimately wilderness areas, so those pristine types of habitats that are unmodified. And after we did this, we then asked them about their past experiences with nature. And so we asked them to reflect either their time that they used to spend when they were 18 in Tampa Bay, or for the people who moved here during their lifetime, the earliest age that they moved here, and to reflect so that we can compare how the amount of time spent in nature has changed over time. And what we found is what we call some extinction of experience. So we're finding that the longer people stay in Tampa Bay, overall, in certain types of nature activities, their experience is declining over time. And what that looks like here, these graphs basically show you with an increase in the amount of years living in Tampa Bay, how does their average hours per week engaging in these different types of nature activities change, either a gain of time or a loss of time. And so what we see for these black and gray ones is basically no significant change. So over time, people's time spent in a room with nature, listening to recordings of nature, or spending time in farms isn't really changing. But what is changing is their time spent in outdoor sporting areas, in urban nature areas, and in wilderness areas. And for some of them, so like wilderness areas, we're basically seeing, over time, generally a loss of around an average of 2 hours per week engaging with wilderness areas. Loss of 2 hours per week may not seem like enough, but also realize that this is equates to about 10 to 18 days every 10 years that they lose being able to spend time in wilderness areas, and recognizing that on average, people usually spend less than 5 hours at any given day being able to go out into wilderness areas. So that's almost half of the time that they're currently spending that we would expect them to lose over time. We did run this into a model to see other factors that may be predicting this extinction of experience. And one of the interesting findings that we saw is that these experiences with nature are declining most notably among residents of Manatee County, as well as Sarasota County for the few that are in there. So this is another example of where we can think about going forward with our activities. How do we address this declining experience with nature, especially for folks that have lived here for a longer amount of time? Thinking about the activities that we can offer, thinking about, especially here we have a local example of Manatee County in particular. So do we need to find more opportunities to get Manatee County residents engaging with nature, providing them opportunities that they may be losing over time? That's a high-level summary, again, of all of the different types of results that can inform our CCMP revision over the next year. Of course, we are going to be having more of these conversations, deeper dives into all of these across all of our different meetings that we have here. So if any of you are interested in coming to any of these meetings, of course, you're welcome to, and we'll do some deeper dives into these. But also, again, we'll eventually have a long report that outlines every single result in the satisfaction survey. So you'll be able to see everything everywhere all at once once it comes out. But yeah, happy to answer any questions in the meantime that folks have about this.
Any questions? Okay. You want to say something?
I was just going to share with the board that the last time we went through a major CCMP revision was in 2017. And that was a really detailed process where there were multiple engagements with the community, with the different committees, with the Agency on Bay and Coastal Management for each of the 39 actions that were ultimately included in the CCMP that was adopted in 2017. And so just acknowledging that this is a large effort that will be coming before this board repeatedly over the course of the next year and a half or so. And so this is an opportunity to sort of think and give some direction to us as staff in terms of how you'd like to be engaged in this process. Would you like us to bring individual actions to each meeting so you can sort of deal with it in depth piecemeal? Do you want it all at the end? Any kinds of direction, things that you would like to see in that CCMP update. It's useful for me to hear that now so that I can shape an engagement process that, meets your needs as our board so that you feel comfortable ultimately when we adopt the new CCMP in 2027.
Be one thought, and maybe work under that habit restoration part. Up in Kings Bay, they had all sorts of things that were bad in that whole area, and there was a major dredging project with a following project where they put a lot of eelgrass in, and the water quality went through the roof. Tourism's gone up very high. It's worked on a lot of things. I know there's some things that we're looking at between the cysts we just talked about, the Pyrididium, which affects our scalloping season down here from the Enclode area. But I think it may be something to take a look at, even if we're going to look at some smaller areas, not doing the whole bay, but maybe those areas that maybe some water flow, maybe some removal of some bad things that are in there could be beneficial, but it might be something that we can inquire out a little bit.
Heard.
Yeah, just to echo that, I think there's lessons learned in other areas that we could apply, especially when we're trying to build those metrics of trust to make the issues more salient and want to involve the public in participating in those restoration activities. So there's definitely areas where we want to see improvement based on these results. And that's the whole point of asking the public sort of these questions of, we know these disconnects exist between the practitioners versus the public, and we want to bring those groups closer together so that we're all working towards the same end that works for everyone's sort of benefit. And that's our goal, I think, in this next CCMP update. And as much as you guys can help inform and guide those activities so that we make them more salient to both you as a policy board member and the public at large that we all serve, I think it's important to us as an organization.
I think things like, you take in account for the boating public, where they're going to go, but you may have some great opportunities to take out some of these areas and maybe put in oyster reef beds around there to improve the water quality from that as well. So I think it's worthy to take a look at.
Yeah. I'll also share feedback from the management board. I think the general guidance that we heard from several of the management board members was that the current plan is very long, a number of pages, quite a few actions and activities. And there was, I think general agreement that it would be a stronger plan if it was more tailored, more actionable to the things that we could really get done over a 10-year time period. And so just wanted to make sure that you all are comfortable with a tighter, more action-oriented plan rather than something that's sort of trying to document the history of recovery here and all of the options of things that we could do, but maybe aren't realistically going to get to in the next 10 years.
Any other thoughts or questions? Okay, that is the last agenda item. Anything else for the go to the board?
Just a note that the next policy board meeting will be on August 21st, and we'll be meeting at Port Manatee. So we'll continue our tour of the watershed, and I'll remind you all of that location as well coming up on the August meeting.
Thank you very much, everybody. And with that, we're adjourned. Thanks.